Over the last few days, you might have noticed a few changes around here at Astrographics, and in particular, you might have noticed that we're not Astrographics anymore. Our dedicated space channel is now dubbed Celestium and is decked out with a new logo, a range of other new bells and whistles, and, well, this. You see, space is an exceptionally busy place between new scientific discoveries, new and changing realities out in the cosmos, and new human endeavors to take us further into the final frontier. So, in this episode, we're going to try out something new and highlight a few fascinating space stories that emerged over the last week or two. If you like this episode, let us know, and we will make more of it, won't we? It's how things work. So, this is This Week in Space by Celestium. Our first story of the week comes not from deep within the cosmic void, or at least, well, not directly, but instead inside a sparsely decorated chamber within the United States House of Representatives. There, on Wednesday, November the 13th, a panel of American former military officials took their seat for a hearing on UFOs, or as the US government refers to them, Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon, or UAPs, because they had to be different. What those officials told Congress were a series of stunning revelations about humanity's contact with extraterrestrial life. But look, before we dive in, we've got to stress one key point here. This hearing, conducted before America's House Oversight Subcommittee, did not include any presentation of direct evidence to back up the claims we're about to discuss. In fact, everything the testifying former official said was later refuted by America's Department of Defense, their former employer, with a statement claiming, in part, that the Pentagon, quote, has not found any verifiable evidence that UAP observation represented extraterrestrial activity, nor has the department discovered any verifiable information to substantiate claims that any programs regarding the possession or reverse engineering of extraterrestrial materials have existed in the past or exist currently. And that is the Pentagon's incredibly wordly way of saying that, no, they've never knowingly kept or reversed engineered alien materials, and very broadly, they're not backing up the claims that Congress's guests were making. Back in March of 2024, the Pentagon even released a full report to that same effect. But with that caveat very much out of the way, let's dive into the hearing, shall we? It's pretty interesting. Quote, "Let me be clear, UAPs are real. Advanced technologies not made by our government or any other government are monitoring sensitive military installations around the globe. Furthermore, the US is in possession of UAP technologies, as are some of our adversaries." End quote. Now, if there was any single standout moment from this hearing, it was that statement made by one Luis Elizondo, a former military intelligence official until 2017, who has spent years arguing that a government conspiracy exists to suppress evidence of UAPs of extraterrestrial origin. Before Congress, Elizondo testified that incursions of UAPs using unknown technologies have been ongoing for decades, despite a failure to report them by the US government, and that both the US and other nations have managed to get their hands on some of this technology. Elizondo explains that not only are these UAPs probing highly sensitive locations, but also, quote, being provocative. In some cases, they are literally splitting aircraft formations right down the middle. He continued, "The question is the frequency increasing? The response is, it depends." Elizondo claimed that the US government restricts public access to such information not only because of the potential sensitivity of the subject matter, but because of a preference to overclassify potentially sensitive materials. As one legislator, Andy Biggs, put it, quote, "It's easier to be quiet and suppress when you don't have the answers." Nor was Elizondo the only witness to offer jarring testimony. A retired Rear Admiral of the US Navy, Tim Gordele, spoke at the proceedings after having offered a written testimony that stated in part, "Confirmation that UAPs are interacting with humanity came for me in January 2015 when I was serving as the commander of the Navy Meteorological and Oceanography Command." Gordele wrote of receiving an email asking urgently for clarification on unidentified flying objects present during a training exercise. The email stated in part, "We are having multiple near-air collisions." Gallaudet detailed how a video attached to the email, now well known in the UAP-oriented community as the Go Fast video, depicted a UAP, quote, "exhibiting flight and structural characteristics unlike anything in our arsenal." He continued, "The implication of the email was clear. The author was asking whether any of the recipients were aware of classified technology demonstrations that could explain these objects. I was confident this was not the case." Quote ends. Gallaudet described that the very following day, the email had disappeared from his inbox and that of all other recipients without any explanation, while Gallaudet's superiors refused to ever discuss the incident or provide any guidance or support to help keep pilots safe. Gallaudet alleged before Congress that elements within the US government are working to discredit UAP whistleblowers and call for far greater transparency within the US government. Also, during the hearing, two other witnesses provided testimony. A former NASA administrator named Michael Gold advocated for increased efforts to destigmatize the UAP phenomenon. Journalist and author Michael Schellenberger, founder of the Substack publication Public, provided a comprehensive overview and timeline of UAP reports from 1947 to 2023 and joined his colleagues in calls for greater transparency around the UAP issue writ large. Among the notable moments from the hearing was one particular exchange between Elizondo and the legislator who led the hearing, Nancy Mace. Asked Mace, quote, "Has the government conducted secret UAP crash retrieval programs? Yes or no?" Said Elizondo, "Yes." Mace continued, "Okay, were they designed to identify and reverse engineer alien craft? Yes or no?" Elizondo replied, "Yes." Later during the hearing, Mace said to Elizondo again, "Are you read into several UAP crash retrieval programs?" That is to say, Mace was asking Elizondo whether he was privy to classified information on those retrieval programs. Elizondo replied, "We would have to have a conversation in a closed session, Mom. I signed documentation 3 years ago that restricts my ability to discuss specifically crash retrievals." Mace and Elizondo had another particularly interesting exchange in response to Elizondo's claims that UAPs monitoring sensitive military installations are, quote, "not made by our government or any other government." Asked Mace on that particular subject, if these technologies are not made by any government, who's making them? Are these private companies you're implying, or is this non-human intelligence? Elizondo replied, "It may be both." Also of note during the hearing were revelations centered on the writer Michael Schellenberger's work, with Schellenberger in his public newsletter recently alleging that the US government is operating, quote, "an active and highly secretive, unacknowledged special access program intelligence operation through the Department of Defense." The name of the program, according to Schellenberger, is Immaculate Constellation. Schellenberger alleged that the program uses high-quality imagery and other methods to record and analyze data on UAPs, and during his spoken testimony, he described one particular encounter between a highly advanced American stealth fighter jet, an F-22 Raptor, and a number of UAPs while on patrol in an unspecified location at an unspecified time. Described Schellenberger after the American jet was approached, quote, "The F-22 broke trajectory and attempted to evade, but was intercepted and boxed in by approximately 3 to 6 UAPs. During that same conversation, after Schellenberger discussed secrecy around this alleged program, the congressperson leading the session, Nancy Mace, made a rather stunning admission of her own. Referring to another legislator, Anna Paulina Luna of the state of Florida, Mace said that during the hearing, quote, "Representative Luna just told me if I say Immaculate Constellation, I'll be on some list. Maybe get a FISA warrant." FISA, referring to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, a law dictating how federal law enforcement and intelligence services can gather foreign intelligence information on US soil. Continued Mace in regards to the possibility of FISA charges against her for mentioning Immaculate Constellation, quote, "So come at me, bro, I guess." Legend. The hearing was the latest in an ongoing effort within the US government to push for greater transparency and fact-finding regarding America's interactions with and understanding of UAPs across the last several decades. In 2023, a landmark hearing on the same topic had received testimony from retired US Air Force Major and whistleblower David Grush, among others. Grush claimed that the US had recovered so-called biologics from UAP crash sites and had been reverse engineering UAPs for decades. Since then, UAP information has come out of the US government in slow drips and in occasional crashing waves amidst a broader push for transparency in a nation where trust in the government, particularly the shadowy underbelly of massive bureaucracies like the Department of Defense, is dropping to record lows. Many of the findings thus far in these UAP investigations have echoed assertions from America's intelligence and military community that the vast majority of UAPs can be explained away as anything from weather balloons to drones to airborne trash to explainable atmospheric phenomena. At the November 2024 hearing, witnesses backed up that very same claim. Said witness Michael Gold, formerly of NASA, quote, "I think probably the vast majority of UAP are drones, experimental aircraft, weather conditions. But there is a percentage that isn't." In fact, beside the general thrust toward greater government transparency, the main consensus among testifying witnesses at the hearing was simply that more should be done on an issue that deserves to be treated more seriously. Gold pointed out that, at best, UAP videos now might be shot with a handheld cell phone or with the gun camera of a fighter jet. He called for NASA to develop instruments using government funding to better study UAPs, even if that doesn't lead to the confirmation of alien technology, but a better capacity to understand, known phenomena that might ultimately be to blame. When asked how he characterizes UAPs at all and frames his thinking about the issue, Luis Elizondo couched the problem in terms of national security, saying, "We are talking about technologies that can outperform anything we have in our inventory. And if this was an adversarial technology, this would be an intelligence failure eclipsing that of 9/11 by an order of magnitude." End quote. In broad strokes, the witnesses appeared to agree with an increasingly popular view of the UAP issue in general, that no matter what else, the alienness of the subject matter cannot be a barrier to approaching it seriously. Here's the main thrust of the issue as it's presented to the US government at the time of writing. Despite Pentagon statements and reports to the contrary, these witnesses are alleging that there is something flying around in America's skies in close proximity to its military assets and fixed installations. That something is behaving in strange ways, relying on strange technology, and acting with unexplained motives. The witnesses' fundamental contention isn't that aliens are the cause of the issue, but instead that whatever is happening, the American public and its lawmakers should know. To that end, change is already underway across the United States. In July of 2022, the US established a specialized unit called the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, collecting UAP reports from the military, from America's Federal Aviation Administration, and from reports made by civilian pilots to air traffic controllers. Information is slowly being declassified, and even the simple fact of these recent hearings' existence is a signal in favor of those calling for deeper investigation around the issue. As those most recent hearing showed, there is very little concrete proof, if any, that pro-transparency advocates around the UAP issue can lean on. But as more hearings take place before US Congress, and as the United States gets ready to transition to a political administration led by the same political parties spearheading those UAP efforts, it appears that more light will soon start shining onto the issue, not less. Or, as new information comes out, well, of course, we'll be back to cover it. Alright, next up, we move from American discussions on UAPs to an item that some alien civilization probably would call a UAP if they saw it for the first time: man-made experimental spaceplanes. Here, we've got not just one, but two stories to cover by way of the two wealthiest and most powerful nations on Earth. Let's start off with China, shall we, where a cutting-edge aerospace project out of the Chengdu Aircraft Design and Research Institute has just been unveiled to the world for the first time. The project is a reusable space shuttle dubbed the Haolong that China expects to use in order to ferry cargo and supplies to the Tiangong, the nation's permanently crewed modular space station, currently orbiting about 250 miles or 400 kilometers, give or take a few, above our heads. The Haolong is the first of two upcoming Chinese shuttles to be revealed to the public as part of an ongoing effort to field an indigenously produced, fully reusable spacecraft to provide low-cost cargo transportation to the Tiangong. After 10 designs were submitted back in September 2023, and 4 were chosen for a more detailed design round, the Haolong and its competitor spacecraft, the Qingzhou, proposed by a microsatellite lab by the Chinese Academy of Sciences, moved along to the final phase. The two aren't in competition with each other anymore. They'll both be developed into fully functional spacecraft, with the Qingzhou expected to debut in late 2025, and the Haolong debuting, well, now. Although the Haolong's precise capabilities aren't currently known, the requirements for the initial design contest will at least give us some insight. It's expected to be able to carry payloads of at least 1,800 kilograms, just short of 4,000 pounds to low Earth orbit, and it should be able to re-enter orbit with more than 2,000 kilograms on board, or 4,400 pounds, before jettisoning that waste and having it burn up in the atmosphere. Just as important as payload is cost. The Haolong is intended to perform cargo transport at a bargain, demanding fees of no more than 120 million yuan, equivalent at the time of writing to $16.5 billion. Now, that's still a relatively steep price, but it's better than what China's currently paying for the same service. Currently, the nation uses an automated spacecraft called the Tiangzhou, which has a new and improved version capable of carrying 7,400 kilos or 16,300 pounds of payload into orbit, but at undisclosed prices that appear to be far beyond what the Haolong will offer. The Tianzhou also isn't reusable, but instead burns up on re-entry, meaning the Haolong will save on the cost of constructing an entire new capsule for each delivery service. It also means that China can not only send experiments up to the Tiangong, but bring them home for further analysis as well. Insofar as its other specs, the Haolong measures 10 meters long by 8 meters wide at the wingtips, features a tail fin and upward sloping wings that will help guide it back to Earth at incredible speed. It's been highlighted in China for its aerodynamic qualities and for its ability to land back on Earth gently using a runway like an atmospherically oriented aircraft. It'll launch to space on a rocket and be able to carry astronauts, or in this case taikonauts, inside its cargo bay while it's docked with the Tiangong space station. The Haolong does have one other interesting element about it, and that's the thermal tiling that makes up its underbelly. Writing for the space section of the predominantly car-focused outlet Jalopnik, writer Ryan King points out, quoting here, "The Haolong shuttle suspiciously shares the same white and black thermal tile underbelly design as NASA's retired shuttle." Of course, that's not to say anything untoward happened in regard to the Haolong, regardless of how suspicious the coincidence may be. NASA happens to know how to make a spaceplane, and well, now China is following suit. And speaking of America's propensity for spaceplanes, we turn our attention to the Boeing X-37B, flying not under the NASA banner, but under the banner of America's Space Force. The X-37B, also known as the Orbital Test Vehicle, is a highly secretive spaceplane that works much like the Haolong does, blasted into space in a rocket but flying down and landing as a spaceplane. A relatively small craft, the X-37B measures just 29 feet, 3 inches long tip to tail, and about 15 feet wide, wingtip to wingtip. That's about 9 by 4.5 meters. It's capable of carrying only a tiny amount of cargo, 500 pounds, 227 kilos, but it's capable of very impressive feats of endurance, designed to orbit for 270 days, but proving at the time of writing that it can orbit for well over 900 days straight. Cruising through low Earth orbit, the X-37B runs at an average speed of about 17,500 miles per hour, 28,000 kilometers per hour. Now, the vast majority of the X-37B's actions while in orbit are a mystery. But about a month ago, America's Space Force released a statement explaining that it was about to use the X-37B to try a brand new maneuver. That maneuver is called aerobraking, a technique intended, quoting here from the Space Force, to change its orbit around Earth and safely dispose of its service module components in accordance with recognized standards for space debris mitigation. And then a little bit later, the use of the aerobraking maneuver, a series of passes using the drag of the Earth's atmosphere, enables the spacecraft to change orbits while expending minimal fuel. So, put simply, the X-37B was going to burn off all of its unnecessary bits and then bounce itself off Earth's atmosphere at incomprehensibly high speeds, using the resulting drag to reach a different orbital plane. During its disclosure, the Space Force dropped a couple of other hints about what the X-37B has been up to, stating that it had been, quote, testing space domain awareness technologies in highly elliptical orbit. The highly elliptical orbit portion of that statement doesn't take much to figure out. The spaceplane was flying in for close passes toward Earth, slingshotting way out into the void and then coming back in again. But as for what space domain awareness technologies could be, well, I mean, we offer you our very best bemused shrug. Already, it was unusual for the Space Force to offer commentary or details of this kind, let alone reveal a brand new spaceflight technique. But then, in mid-November, they went a step further, releasing a video that went to the trouble of detailing the specifics of the maneuver. Said Boeing engineer John Ely in the video, quote, "When we aerobrake, we utilize atmospheric drag to effectively step down our apogee one pass at a time until we get to the orbital regime that we want to be in." Translating from space genius to English here, the spacecraft can use aerobraking to slow down its orbit closer to the Earth, eventually reaching a target orbital altitude while expending far less fuel than such a maneuver would usually demand. Quoting Ely, "When we do this, we save enormous amounts of propellant, and that's really why aerobraking is important." In the video, the X-37B sort of belly flops towards the Earth's atmosphere, with its nose pointed up, withstanding immense heat on its underbelly as a result of the friction generated by the maneuver. But just as important as understanding this cool new space braking technique is understanding just why America's Space Force went to the trouble of releasing the information at all, let alone with a helpful video to ensure that there's no confusion about what this super secret spaceplane is getting up to. As writer Vivian Machi explained, contributing to the outlet Aviation Week, the intended audience to receive the disclosure might not be America's citizens or its allies, but its adversaries. Quoting Machi, "Disclosing this aerobraking maneuver could be the Space Force's way of showing the world what the spaceplane is capable of, with an intended audience of anyone from allies and partners, adversaries, lawmakers, the industry, potential recruits, and perhaps even the service itself." As for whether that intended audience got the message, even the Space Force might not know, but for anybody taking a keen interest in the future of space travel, the aerobraking technique itself simply can't go unnoticed. And in our final story of the week, we touch on the last feat of US-centric spaceflight, the most recent test launch of the Starship mega rocket coming courtesy of SpaceX. On November the 19th at 4 in the afternoon, local time in the US state of Texas, the Starship conducted a successful launch with a bit of a caveat. Now, to understand the feat that SpaceX was trying to pull off here, we've got to understand two things: the sheer size of the Starship it was launching, and the precision of the maneuver it ultimately had hoped to execute. First, the question of size. The SpaceX Starship is a gargantuan piece of tech, sitting at a height of 398 feet or 121.3 meters, and utilizing 33 copies of a tremendously powerful engine, the Raptor, each producing over 500,000 pound force of thrust or 2.3 meganewtons. And then there's the precision side of the equation. The Starship's first stage rocket booster, even by itself, is really big, at a total height of 233 feet or 71 meters. But despite its size, that first stage rocket, known as the Super Heavy, is supposed to fly back to its launch site after separating from the Starship's second stage. Once separated, it's intended to maneuver so precisely that it can slow itself down from supersonic speeds to just barely more than walking pace, while gently depositing itself into a pair of arms referred to colloquially as chopsticks on either side of the launch tower. The chopsticks then close around the booster and catch it in a, quite frankly, incredible feat that SpaceX pulled off successfully on the prior test's launch on October the 13th of this year. And the launch on November the 19th was important for other reasons too. The 6th overall launch of the SpaceX Starship, it would also be the final launch of the Block 1 spacecraft, a version that was intended solely for early flight tests. Block 2 will be a little bit bigger and a good deal more powerful, while the eventual Block 3 will be even more gigantic, standing at a height of nearly 500 feet or 150 meters tall. Block 3 will be capable of carrying a staggering 200 tons of payload or more into orbit on the back of up to 35 Raptor engines in its first stage booster, and 9 more on its second stage. And not only was this the final launch of Block 1, but the owner of SpaceX, Elon Musk, knew that his friends would be watching. US President-elect Donald Trump and a handful of assorted aides were in attendance for the event, backing up their billionaire buddy after Musk's close collaboration with Trump on the latter's run for re-election. So, with the world and his own political allies watching, Musk oversaw the November 19th Starship launch and quite likely breathed a major sigh of relief when it achieved liftoff without a hitch. Once it separated from its first stage booster, the second stage rocket, the real ship portion of the Starship, began a series of exercises intended to show off its capabilities. Carrying a payload of precisely one plush stuffed banana, the Starship executed a relighting burn of several of its Raptor engines, indicating that it will be able to safely return to Earth like its first stage booster did when it returns from orbital missions. The Starship is intended to be entirely reusable, with a quick turnaround time, and it'll even be caught in those same chopsticks as we mentioned before. But until this test, it wasn't clear whether the Raptor engines, finicky little beasts as one SpaceX advisor described them to CNN, would be able to reignite in space after having already shut down. And on the flight, the Starship's newly modified heat shield also underwent some critical tests, and its flaps and stabilizers were stressed under adverse conditions as the craft moved back toward Earth. 65.5 minutes after takeoff, the Starship angled itself upright during the final stages of atmospheric re-entry, crashing base first into the Indian Ocean off the Australian coast. Said one of the co-hosts of SpaceX's webcast, Kate Chase, of the re-entry, "I am shocked, to be honest. I think many folks are. The fact that it survived all the way through while flying a lesser-gen heat shield is just absolutely incredible," end quote. And then building on that observation, turns out the vehicle had more capability than our calculations predicted, and that is why we test like we fly. Unfortunately for SpaceX, there was one slightly sour note during the launch and splashdown process. The moment of trouble came by way of the booster rockets that had launched the Starship to orbit and that SpaceX had hoped would provide a repeat of its chopsticks catch, as shown back in October. This time, however, the Super Heavy booster had to abort, as, quoting from SpaceX here, "automated health checks of critical hardware on the launch and catch tower triggered an abort of the catch attempt." That is to say, the problem wasn't with the rocket booster itself, but with the chopsticks apparatus that was meant to catch it. Although the abort wasn't entirely what SpaceX was hoping for, with President-elect and its own founder among the spectators, it may have been a blessing in disguise. Under adverse conditions, the Super Heavy executed a successful divert maneuver, ending with a soft splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico. Despite that little asterisk, the success of the Starship in its 6th and final Block 1 launch means that it's full speed ahead for SpaceX as the company endeavors to field a fully operational version of its spacecraft in the near term. In all likelihood, our future installments here on Celestium will feature the Starship quite prominently, as it will feature all the other bits and bobs that humanity sends into space and all the magnificent discoveries that still await us in the cosmos. Again, if you'd like to see more of this in the future, let us know. And as always, thanks for watching.